How can we not start by invoking the name of Idan Alexander, who is spending Shabbat at home with his family in Israel? After more than 580 days held captive by Hamas, he is now held close by his loved ones and will never know the full extent of his trauma. According to some reports, at some point a tunnel collapsed on him and injured his shoulder. His whole body has bedbug bites. He survived on meager amounts of pita, rice, and legumes. He experienced entire months without sunlight, without showers, with pain and complete isolation. Thinking even of a little of it is overwhelming. The physical and the psychological torture. Forget about how he endured 580 days. How did he endure one day? Of the thousands of words composed this past week about Idan's release, the geopolitics, the question of whether the Trump administration's direct negotiations with Qatar were a wonder or a betrayal, the fate of the remaining hostages, the ongoing costs of this brutal war. The words that penetrated me the most were within a short post on Facebook that focused on Idan's age. He's 21. And this was invoked when he had his first beer since being released. Now he is legal. And yes, he was legal when he turned 18 in Israel, but he's not just an Israeli. He's an American. So he emerged from captivity of legal age in his hometown of Tenafly, New Jersey. We'll get back to that. He's 21 now. He was 19 when he was captured. Think of the 19-year-olds in your life, in this room, and let that sink in. And what was he doing on October 7th? He was in uniform, serving in the IDF, defending a nation. When I have my year-out meetings with B'nai Mitzvah, we talk about the different notions of adulthood in contemporary life versus ancient society. Back then, turning 13 and becoming bar mitzvah meant true adulthood. No asterisks. Nowadays, we turn to wonderful young people like Rafa, and we say to him, here, on this bima, you're an adult. But out there, you're a kid, you're a teenager. Modern adulthood begins later for us, around age 18, when, I remind them, you are permitted to serve in the military here in America, and you are obligated to do so in Israel. It's impossible to overstate the centrality of mandatory military service in the IDF within Israeli society. Since Israel's inception, it has had to require every 18-year-old, of course with some still very controversial exceptions amongst the Haredi population, to take up arms in defense of the nation. Our kids graduate high school, maybe choose a gap year, and mostly head off to campus. Israeli kids graduate high school and wait for the letter telling them the date of their giyus, their enlistment. Of course, some of our kids, so deeply connected to their Zionism, they graduate high school, they eschew American universities, and they go volunteer to defend the state of Israel, instead of heading to a campus where they might face hordes who revile the state of Israel. Right now, Beth and Pressman can count among its young graduates a robust number of Israeli soldiers and those who recently completed their service. We are inordinately proud of their devotion and their sacrifice. This is no game. And as I thought about these brave youngsters in uniform, both those born and raised in Israel, and those who elect to serve as chayalim bodedim, as lone soldiers, whose nuclear families are overseas, I started to think about the concept of choice including the choice not to have a choice. The decision to be bound and claimed and vulnerable and lesser in some meaningful ways in order to aspire towards something greater and grander. Let me explain by means of our Parsha Emor. The reading begins with the laws about the Kohanim, the priestly class who served in the Mishkan in the desert and whose descendants served in the temples in Jerusalem. They lived a curtailed life. At the core of this system is a tribe of the Jewish people who were born into obligatory service. Just because they were descendants of Aaron, they and their descendants descendants had less choice than their counterparts. They could not choose to be farmers or shepherds or artisans. Their work and their life was dictated to them. Their livelihood was the ritual realm of the people. And as a result, they lived with restrictions, some of which are detailed in the beginning of Parshat Emor. Principally, they could not attend to many of their loved ones or any of their friends when they died, because close contact with the deceased would render them tameh, and thus unfit to serve in the temple. And to this day, many observant Kohanim do not enter cemeteries for this reason, except for the funerals of the very relatives that are listed in the Parsha as exceptions. The Kohanim lived under other restrictions related to their bodies, their dress, their hair, whom they could not marry. Some of those rules still pertain. And for these ancient Kohanim and their modern descendants, the burden was inherited, whether or not it was wanted. There is a parallel. It's imperfect, but it's apt to the modern Israeli soldier. In order to maintain the ancient system of Jewish life, Jewish ritual life, in order to give that society more of something, a percentage of the population was born with the obligation to live with less of many things. And in order to maintain the modern wonder of Israeli civilization, in order to give this society a chance at expanse and life, the population spends a percentage of their lives as soldiers with the obligation to live with restrictions and to expose themselves potentially to death. Seeing the ancient Kohanim through the prism of the modern soldiers should evoke some awe, or at least some appreciation for the choices they lacked, for the freedoms they never had, for the narrowness they endured so that the people they served would have ritual and spiritual breadth and space. And if we have wonder for those born into it, how much more so for those who choose it, who choose to live with less choice, like Idan Alexander. He has Israeli-born parents, but Idan was raised in New Jersey. He was not a Kohen in this sense, not born into this military obligation, this chosen limitation, this selected vulnerability that led to his captivity. He chose it. He chose having fewer choices. I stand in awe. And the truth is, we can look to many places in spiritual life, in relational family life, where we are witness to the noble act of people choosing to have less choice. The stakes are not always as life and death as they are for lone soldiers, but they're amazing in their own right. Every Jew by choice is leaping into enormous elected restraint with lots of restrictions. No one forces the hand of a convert. And every chuppah celebrates two people making the voluntary choice to limit their choices, to rein in their urges, to experience some version of less, hopefully to gain some grander sense of more. The New York-based psychotherapist Esther Perel wrote a whole book on this. It's a masterful study of what love, commitment, and marriage really are. Her title is on the nose. She named her book, Mating in Captivity. To deny that marriage is a form of captivity is delusional. It may be a chosen captivity, but you are indeed electing to be captive on some level, learning how to mate and how to thrive and how to grow within that cage. That's not an easy thing. Which is why I think every couple who makes this choice is courageous. They are soldiers for love, priests for relationships, choosing to have fewer choices. And does anyone in this room have children? In that infant stage and that toddler stage and that adolescent stage, did you feel redeemed or captured? Liberated or restricted? Obviously, hopefully, a bit of both. But when you choose to be parents, to bring life into this world, you are choosing years, decades of a life with limitations. Idan Alexander chose something and suffered too many things, unlike any of us have. But we are and ought to be just like him in many ways, accepting the mantle of priesthood, the heaviness of service, the risk of protecting that which we love, the voluntary indenturedness of a life of meaning, and one that comes with no promises or guarantees. Rabbi Asher Brander points out a wonderful teaching in the Shem Mishmuel, which is the seminal work by Rabbi Shmuel Bornstein, the second Rebbe of the Sukkotchover Hasidic dynasty outside Warsaw. He notes that Shabbat and Yontif, the holidays, are similar, but they're not the same thing, neither legally nor conceptually. Legally, halachically, there are leniencies regarding observing Yontif, such as permission to carry objects, transfer flame, and cook, that do not apply to Shabbat. But in a realm above that, the Shem Mishmuel notes that a core difference between Shabbat and Yontif stems from the phrase the Torah uses to describe our holidays over and over again, including numerous times in Parshat Emor. As Rafa read many times today, Mikra Kodesh. Something like a declaration of holiness or declared as holy. What does that mean? And how is it different than Shabbat, which is never described that way? He says that Shabbat is an itaruta de le'ela, an awakening from above. Shabbat's a gift from God. Shabbat is just given. It's bestowed. It exists whether or not we do anything to it. Shabbat is primordial. It stems from the creation of the world. In this esoteric way of thinking about it, Shabbat has an independent essence. It would be Shabbat. There would be Shabbat whether or not we were there to receive it, or mark it, or observe it, or celebrate it. It would just be. It's part of the DNA of reality. But Yontif relies on us. It doesn't exist without us. The very concept of a holiday, of a festival, depends on us down here declaring the day to be special, calling it a moed, an appointed time, rendering it a mikra kodesh, something declared holy, separate, distinct, because we chose it. We chose it with our words, and we choose it with our actions. And with our choice, with all the restrictions of holidays, our choice to reduce our own choices, with our voluntary decision to live in a certain type of restrictive cage. This is an itaruta dilatata, an awakening that stirs from down below, from earth, from us, from some human will to live elevated, even if it requires to live limited, from some profound urge to select that which no one is forcing us to select. Without us, there are no holidays. Even God lacks the power to create Yontif alone. Without elected imprisonment, there are no marriages, no children, no families. Without a mandatory army, there's no Israel. And on some level, assessing the phenomenon of voluntary service, the wonder of Idan Alexander's departure from Tenafly to Tel Aviv, from university to uniform, from freshman freedom to military musts and mustn'ts, from campus protests offering support to Hamas to defending the Jewish people from Hamas. He chose that. Perhaps all we can do is step back with reverence and awe and declare it holy. Mikra Kodesh indeed. Welcome home, Idan, to your many homes. May your example inspire us to choose honorably, and even at times, to choose not to have a choice.